All right, let's go ahead and get started here. So hello everybody, thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking about Google Analytics 360 and the integration with DoubleClick for publishers. So this is really geared towards news and media companies. DoubleClick for publishers, I would hope most people would know what that is. But essentially, we'll kind of go through a little bit of an overview of DoubleClick for publishers, but most of the presentation today is going to be talking about that actual integration between Google Analytics 360, which is the premium version of Google Analytics, and then DoubleClick for publishers. So for news and media companies, DoubleClick for publishers is an extremely important tool used to place and monetize ads across their digital properties. So we'll go over a couple examples of what that kind of looks like on a website. But for the most part, if you've been to any of the big publishing sites, BBC, New York Times, Washington Post, Mashable, any of these websites, they're all using DoubleClick for publishers to place those ads that you see there. So you'll see ads at the top, on the sides, at the bottom, sometimes within the content. For the most part, most of those ads are actually coming through DoubleClick for publishers. And one of the big things about the integration right now is not really that many large publishers are using it. So there's not going to be a whole lot of different examples to share with you. We have a couple publishers that are luckily actually using the integration. So I'll be able to take you through some examples that way. But in terms of things like case studies, I mean, Google has a case study that they just released on AccuWeather on the GA360 and DFP integration, which I have linked at the end, so you can check that out if you'd like. But again, this is still a relatively new integration, so they're still looking for new use cases, new ways to use it. But today we'll be talking about a little bit kind of what that integration does, how it works, and then also some of the benefits, and I'll show you some examples. So a few housekeeping items. If you have questions, please add them to the question box in GoToWebinar. I'll get to those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. This will probably be a shorter webinar. Really, this is a very small, I would say, aspect of Google Analytics 360. But we are going to be talking about just one integration today, probably last about half an hour, and then we'll have time at the end for a Q&A. I'll be recording this webinar and I'll also make the slides available as well. So look for a follow-up email from our marketing team over the next few days with links to both of those. And if you have any additional questions that you don't want to ask during the webinar, definitely feel free to email me. My email will be listed here in a few slides, so you can grab that, send me a message that way. And then, as I mentioned, at the end of the slide deck, I actually have some additional resources that will go into detail about some of the things we're talking about today. We'll be talking about some custom tracking options to kind of enhance that integration, things like custom dimensions and content groupings within Google Analytics. And so I'll have some links to resources more about those if you're not familiar. And also, when I'm talking about Google Analytics 360, instead of having to say that the entire time, I'll abbreviate it to GA360. And then also, instead of saying DoubleClick for publishers, I'll just call it DFP. So just so we're on the same page, don't want to lose you there. But with that, let's go ahead and I'll introduce the company I work for. The company's called InfoTrust. So essentially, we are a digital analytics consulting and product development company. We're based in Cincinnati, Ohio, but we also have an office in Dubai. We are both 2015 and 2016 Inc. 5000 members. I think 2015 we're number 790, and then we were, I believe, 8 something this year. Can't remember off the top of my head. We've been a Cincinnati Best Places to Work finalist for the last 5 years. That's something we're really proud about. Kind of speaks to our office culture. We analyze over 3,000 sites a year and support them. So with all of our clients, taking into account all the different websites and digital properties they own, that's a lot. And you can also see our certifications there towards the bottom. So we are Google Analytics certified partners. We are Google Analytics 360 authorized resellers. One thing that we're excited about, we actually became Google Optimized 360 certified about, I think, 3 weeks ago. And that's actually a new product within that Google Analytics 360 suite that makes testing and optimization easy on your website. So it essentially allows you to run A/B, multivariate, and redirect tests quickly and easily on your site. So if you have any questions on that specific tool, definitely feel free to email me as well. The email will be on the next slide. So introducing myself, my name is Andy Gibson. I work for InfoTrust in the role of head of vertical for news and media. Essentially, I consult for large news and media organizations across multiple countries on how to get the most out of their digital analytics and content. So really my focus is on Analytics 360, Tag Management 360, or Tag Management 360, I should say, and Optimize 360. But for this webinar, we'll really be focusing only on GA360 and then the integration with DFP. Some other fun things you might want to know about me. I actually graduated from the University of Dayton with an MBA. University of Dayton is in Ohio. I own a pit bull rescue. Her name is Mildred, but I actually nicknamed her Millie because that sounds a little bit better and less like my grandma. My favorite book is a biography called The Wright Brothers by David McCullough, who's a world-renowned author. They are some fellow Daytonians. They're born in Dayton, Ohio, and they created a little thing called the airplane. So if you've ever been on an airplane, you should thank the Wright brothers. So that's enough about me. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at what we'll be talking about here today. So here's the agenda for the webinar today. I'm going to start off by talking about the actual integration and how it works. So I don't want to get too technical with this. Obviously, a lot of this stuff is kind of occurring on the back end within Google's systems. So I'm going to really take this at a high level so I don't confuse both of us. Next, we'll cover the benefits of Google Analytics 360 and the DoubleClick for Publishers integration. I'll go over a few potential use cases of the integration, and then I'll also show you some really good example reports to demonstrate the power of the integration, and I think that's probably the section that you'll both most be interested in. And then finally, I'll have time towards the end to answer any questions related to Google Analytics 360 or the DFP integration. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. So I'm assuming everyone in attendance today knows what DoubleClick for Publishers is. If you don't, it is a advertising software as a service that's managed by Google. So it was actually a standalone product before, standalone company, I should say, before Google bought them in March of 2008. And then later in 2010, Google relaunched it as DoubleClick for Publishers and also DoubleClick for Publishers Small Business. So there's two different versions of DoubleClick there. But essentially, it allows publishers to easily sell and place ads on their digital property. So like we were talking about with sites like Mashable or New York Times, those websites essentially are going to add a tag to the site. It's actually called the it's actually called the Google Publisher Tag, GPT for short. And once that tag is placed on the site, then it allows Google to essentially place those ads wherever you specify. So in this example, obviously, I have some really nice flat icons throughout the presentation kind of showing you, but essentially if you're wanting to place ads on a website, you have something like DoubleClick for Publishers that's going to actually handle selling that ad inventory and then placing those on the site. So for example, when you go to a publisher site like ESPN.com, let's take for instance, and this is one I just grabbed from today, you see ads at the top, the side, the bottom of the page. You know, as you continue scrolling down, you'll see more. More than likely, those ads are coming through DFP. So for this actual banner here, we can see that StubHub has a large banner at the top there, which is the one that says sell your tickets to the next fan on the depth chart. And then also there's a background kind of around the content that's not really clickable, just kind of like a skin for the actual web page. So they're really the ad is at the top there. This ad's actually being served through DFP. I double checked that's being served there. And then the ad at the top is really what's clickable. So essentially what ESPN is doing, they're essentially adding a JavaScript snippet, a tag for the Google Publisher tag, and then they're able to say where they want those ads to appear. And from there, they can really sell in those ad spaces to any advertisers that are looking to advertise on their site. The actual tag used to render these ads is called the Google Publisher Tag, GPT for short. And really not going to get into much info or detail on that actual tag or how it works, but I did put a link on the resource slide at the end of the presentation for more info on that specific tag. So we'll go over some caveats for the actual integration between Google Analytics 360 and DoubleClick for Publishers here in a little bit. One of them is actually using that GPT tag, so we'll kind of go through that when we get there. So here's where it gets a little complicated. I'm going to, again, take a very high level to this so we don't get confused here. But how does this actual integration between Google Analytics 360 and DFP work? So before we get into what that integration actually does between Google Analytics and between DFP, I'm going to kind of explain the process for what happens when somebody comes to a site. So essentially, GA360 and DFP are both going to utilize JavaScript tags to collect information on the page and information about certain ad interactions. So through that integration, Google Analytics 360 and DFP tags are going to communicate with each other that essentially share a ID. So there's a shared ID being used to identify joint actions by a user on the page. So each of these systems are going to be logging multiple IDs that are generated on that page, and then inter-tag communication ensures these logged IDs are the same. So essentially they're able to talk to each other and say, what do you have for an ID? Okay, here's what I have. Okay, let's match these up. So let me give you an example, just make it a little bit easier to understand here. So for instance, let's say I go to ESPN.com, and let's assume they're using both Google Analytics 360 and DFP, and then have the integration already set up. So GA360 is going to record that I have visited the homepage at a certain time from a certain browser in a certain geographic location, etc. DFP is going to be recording similar information, but really related to the ads that are shown on the page. So in the example on the previous page of the homepage for ESPN.com, it's going to record an impression for that StubHub banner ad. Now let's say I click on that StubHub ad and another window opens up to take me to some StubHub landing page. GA360 and DFP are both going to be able to match IDs for all these actions being recorded, all the actions that I've taken on that specific page. So in GA, it's going to be recorded as a page view. Within DFP, it's going to be an impression for that specific ad. It's going to be a ad click. And essentially, because they're able to communicate, these two tags are able to communicate, it's going to match these IDs up. And so now it knows that a single user has had one page view, one ad impression, and one ad click. If these tags couldn't communicate, Analytics 360 and DFP aren't going to be able to determine which ad impressions match which Google Analytics 360 hits, meaning that within the reporting, we wouldn't be able to say that I had one page view, one ad impression, and one click. Excuse me. So GA360 is only going to service that DFP data when both the linked DFP network and Analytics 360 properties sent hits to respective systems from that same page. So the DFP network and GA360 property must both be linked, which we'll be talking about in a little bit, and they're only available when the hits are sent and ads are served for those data to be available in the integration. A little bit more information on how it works. GA360 is going to join its data with DFP's log files using that shared ID, so then they can match those ad events with analytics hits. And so if those IDs are inconsistent, like if you have an issue with your implementation, then the system's not going to be able to pull that data into the analytics reporting. And currently, as a side note, video ads and mobile ads aren't currently supported with this integration. So that was a lot there. Sorry for going into so much detail. I just want to make sure we're kind of on the same page about what's happening on the back end. In this next section, we're going to be talking about the benefits of the actual integration between GA360 and DFP. So the integration between GA360 and DFP allows essentially data to flow between the two tools. There's going to be two major features here. One is going to be sharing GA audiences with DFP. And I'll go into more detail on both of these here in a second. The other one's going to be pushing DFP data into GA360. So number one is really kind of a smaller feature of this integration. Number two is the main feature that we see a lot of publishers really excited about. So I'll kind of briefly share number one. We'll go into that a little bit, but number two is really the crux of, I think, the power of this integration. So for this first feature, we're going to discuss GA passing data into DFP. So essentially what's made possible is you are able to share a Google Analytics audience with DFP to essentially show ads towards that audience. So essentially what a GA audience is going to be, it's a list of cookies or mobile advertising IDs, and it's really just going to be cookies because this is only for websites and not for mobile apps. That represents a group of your users you want to re-engage with. So if you've ever used Google Analytics before, you know you're able to create audiences for things like remarketing through AdWords, through the Google Display Network. So that's why if you go to a website one time and let's say you view shoes on Macy's.com, you go to 10 different other websites and then you finally start seeing ads for Macy's and that specific shoe show up online. This is all being done through Google Analytics audiences. So the audiences work very similarly with DFP. Instead of actually remarketing to them as a marketer, you're actually showing ads to these specific segments. So essentially, there are multiple Google tools that can use these GA audiences. I've mentioned AdWords, DoubleClick Bid Manager. These are all basically for remarketing campaigns. And then DFP uses these audiences to essentially target specific ads. So really the benefit for this integration, for this feature, is you're able to show more personalized, relevant ads to people visiting your site. And so this is really made possible by two main abilities. The first one is going to be targeting users based on their activity on your site. So essentially, a Google Analytics audience is just an advanced segment that you can push into DFP to show ads to. Because GA360 is tracking users' behavior on your site, you're able to create audiences based on certain types of activity that people have done. So let me give you a few examples to make this a little bit more concrete. You can create an audience for, let's say, people that visited the sports section of your site in the last week. Let's think about, New York Times, or I don't know why I use them as an example all the time, but a local news site, something like that. So people are visiting a certain sports section of your site in the last week, showing that these users are much more interested in sports-related topics than someone just generally visiting the site and kind of viewing all different areas. Now, let's say you have a large advertiser like Dick's Sporting Goods that's been placing ads across your website. Wouldn't it really be valuable, or more valuable, to be able to show those specific ads to really only people interested in sports? So the short answer to this is yes. You're able to create audiences that are based on their actual browsing history. So, in the last 7 days, these people have visited the sports section, or these people have visited the sports section and viewed a specific number of pages. Obviously, coming to Dick's Sporting Goods and saying, okay, we can actually give you a more engaged user base around the activities, around sport, that would be a little bit more valuable than just saying, okay, yeah, we can sell you a ad on the homepage or the sports section or something like that. You can also show ads based on engagement with those users. So, for instance, you can show ads to people that have visited the site every day in the last week, users that spend a certain amount of time on the site. This is a bit more theoretical. I really haven't seen anybody use these specific type of segments before, but it is possible through this integration. The second ability here is the ability to target users based on certain types of attributes. So things like geographic location, technology, subscriber status. So if you have a subscription model to your website, you can know whether they're essentially a subscriber or not. Things like age range, gender, any of those data points that you're actually collecting, you can send those into a segment to base that on. Let's see. So want to make sure that we know here with Google Analytics 360 and really with the free version, you're not able to collect personally identifiable information like name, address, email, security, social security number, any of those things. But if you are using certain types of tools to add data to user profiles or something like that, you can do things like age, range, sex. I believe for certain DFP audiences, you can use some of the Google DoubleClick data. I haven't actually checked on this in a while. I know when we first set up the integration, we were actually beta testing it probably a year ago. You weren't able to use any of the GDN information like age range or gender, but I can double check on that. I just remember that off the top of my head. So for some of these data points, they're available out of the box in GA360. So things like geographic location, devices used, etc. For other data points, like whether they're a subscriber or not, you'd actually need to collect that information using custom tracking. So this is kind of where Google Analytics 360 and kind of the power behind that comes into play. So essentially what you would want to do is work with your development team, and generally if you're a larger publisher, you already have Google Analytics 360, a reseller like InfoTrust or someone like Google that's actually helping you directly. But you would work with your developers to make sure that we're collecting that necessary data points so you can actually have that valuable reporting and analysis. So let's take a look at an example here. Let's say you have a digital subscription plan for your site. So something like you can read up to 10 articles per month for free, then you have to subscribe. For house ads, so these are going to be ads that you're placing on your own site through DFP, it'd be extremely valuable to essentially show the ad to only people that are not subscribed to your site. I know I've run into many instances on other sites, and I actually think I have an example here later on in the presentation of when I've either been a member or I've been logged in or something like that, and there's ads being placed on the site actually trying to get me to subscribe or trying to sign up. So obviously not the best way to show an ad to somebody because you're not really understanding who I am as a user, as a reader. And now obviously I'm not going to click on that. It's a wasted impression. So essentially this integration is going to make that possible to either add or remove people from certain segments based on their actual attributes. And then here's the example. So with this integration, you can actually use that real user data to personalize those ads. So how many people here have seen ads on websites that they visit regularly that are really in no way relevant? Raise your hand. Obviously, don't raise your hand. You're going to look silly doing that. But I would venture to guess that most of you have seen these types of ads. So let's take a look at a local TV station site. I already have an insider subscription. So one of the questions here would be why I'm actually seeing this insider promotion. Obviously, I can't sign up for it again. I already have one. So really nothing that I should be seeing. Plus, if you're giving me a better deal through this ad than I did, I originally had when I signed up, now I'm going to be angry, right? So through this integration, you're able to essentially remove these people from the list of ads that they're seeing. Pretty ironically, there's actually a great ad right below it for Sling. I've actually been doing some research on the internet for Sling to see if it was a good option for canceling my Time Warner subscription. So Sling's actually remarketing to me based on my visits to their site without signing up for a membership. So very smart, but not really related to what we're covering here today. And so here are some examples of how you actually go about building that audience list in Google Analytics 360. The top left screenshot here shows the first step, which is choosing the specific view in Google Analytics where that data is coming from, and then the actual DFP destination account for the audience, so where that audience is actually going to be sent. And then the bottom right screenshot there shows the interface for creating that audience. So you'll notice it looks exactly like the segment builder within Google Analytics with all the same features. So it's essentially the segment builder, just renamed audience builder. So in this example audience, I'm actually creating an audience of users that have been on the site in the past 7 days or less. You can also take a previously created segment in GA and then convert that to an audience list. So here's a list of a bunch of ones that we just have in our support accounts. These are all custom ones we've created. Essentially, you'd find that segment you want to convert to an audience. You click on the little actions button to the right, the drop down, and then you click on that build audience button. This is going to essentially put you into the workflow that I just described on the previous slide, where you go back, you select the view, the DFP account, etc. Now, the main feature I'm really excited to share with you guys is actually pushing data from DFP into Google Analytics 360. This is really the most powerful and beneficial feature of the integration, and this is really what gets the publishers that I work with excited. So for this feature, DFP data, things like metrics like impressions, clicks, ad revenue, etc., those are being pushed into Google Analytics 360 reports. So that gives you more context around your site's performance. So instead of simply knowing things like your world news section has the most page views on your site, you can see which sections or pages have the most impressions, clicks, highest click-through rate, and ultimately are driving the most ad revenue. So before this integration was really a thing, it wasn't really possible to understand that information within GA, right? You have two separate systems, two separate data sets. There's no way to essentially upload that information into GA and say, okay, now we know that our homepage is generating this much revenue versus our weather page is generating this much. So with this integration, essentially is allowing you to push that information from DFP, which before that was in disparate sources, into GA, and so now you kind of have one source of truth. What's important to note is really the integration with GA is not made for kind of accounting, charging, billing, any of that stuff. Obviously, that still takes place in DFP and anywhere you're charging your ad customers, but it does give you kind of a really good idea of what sections, what categories of content, what types of content are the most valuable in terms of revenue. So the main benefit here is going to be a unified view of ad revenue and user behavior. So you can actually improve your monetization strategy, right? So a lot of publishers, and by a lot, I mean pretty much everyone, has some type of ad monetization strategy. I've worked with many publishers that at the time couldn't really tell me which sections of their site were driving the most ad revenue, which types of content were driving the most ad revenue. And so that's information that a lot of publishers still lack. And like I mentioned at the very beginning, we still see a lot of publishers have not adopted this integration yet. So it's certainly something where some are using the free version of GA, others are using Site Catalyst, Omniture, Adobe Analytics, whatever it's called now. So really the first step is you have to have a GA 360 account, so premium version of GA, and then you also have to be using DFP. So really without this knowledge, without this integration, how can you optimize those ad placements to improve certain KPIs, let's say like revenue per 1,000 sessions? If you really don't understand which sections of your site, which types of ads on your site are driving that revenue, you really can't optimize that. So when that integration has been completed, you've gone through the steps, and we'll talk about those steps here in a little bit. You'll notice that there is a new section of reports under your behavior section within Google Analytics called Publishers. So once you complete that integration, essentially those reports show up automatically. That section houses 3 standard reports. So you're going to have an overview report, publisher pages, and then publisher refers. And I'll take you through these here in a second. So these reports are generated automatically. You don't have to do anything with custom tracking for these reports to work. These reports will actually help you understand which traffic sources, which specific pages on your site are driving the most ad revenue. And the second part here is custom reports. So outside of those standard reports that we just talked about, you also have the ability to create custom reports, as always in Google Analytics, with custom data points to better understand how your site and content is performing. So for example, you can utilize Google Analytics 360's custom tracking features like custom dimensions and content groupings to understand which content categories, types of content, sections of your site, authors are really driving the most ad revenue. So these custom data points, custom dimensions, and content groupings, those need to be set up first in your GA360 properties before you can be able to use them in a custom report. Pretty obvious there. But this is really where you'll see the most value from the integration. So everybody's going to have, once you integrate these 2 tools, those 3 standard reports. But beyond that, a lot of companies and a lot of publishers think of their content in a much different way. So with the standard reports, sure, you're going to want to know things like DFP metrics, impressions, click-through rate, clicks, revenue per 1,000 impressions for the entire site. Sure, that's great. It's also nice to know the top pages on your site in terms of those metrics and top traffic sources. But for many of you, and really should be all of you, this isn't enough to provide that deep analysis. And really, each publisher is going to think of their content in different ways. So I've worked with some that think of their content in different sections of a site. Others think of their content in certain categories and so on. And generally, this is pretty unique to each publisher. So it's usually set up through the content management system. So really making sure that we can break that content down into ways that people within the company think of it is really important. So moving from one publisher to another, I've noticed that I say one thing and they're like, no, we don't think of our content this way. We think of it this way. And then everybody kind of below them from corporate at the site director level, that's how they think of the content. So if I say something like, what section of the site are we talking about? They're going to automatically divert to something like content classification. So it really depends on how your organization and how your CMS breaks that content down. But however that is, we want to make sure that we're tracking that with something like a custom dimension or a content grouping in Google Analytics. And then that'll make that reporting much more valuable. So let's take a look at a couple examples here. Let's, think through a couple examples. For newspaper sites, like let's say New York Times, they have many different sections of their site. So you have the homepage, world news, U.S. news, politics, health, etc. if the New York Times utilized content groupings within Google Analytics to group together their similar content, they could instead look at publisher revenue by each section. So questions they could answer are things like, does world news generate more revenue than US news? Does the health section get more impressions than the text section? All these questions are going to be able to be answered if you're using a combination of that integration and then also content groupings or custom dimensions in GA. For an online news site like Mashable, they actually have many different types of content that appear on the site. So I'm assuming many of you have been to the site before, but they essentially have stories. They have stories with videos, slideshows, sponsored content, etc. If they're using a custom dimension or a content grouping to track these different types of content on the site, they can then see things like if stories with videos drive more revenue than stories without videos. So that's pretty interesting, right? So another example here is one of our publishing clients actually uses a kind of content syndication system to pull in stories from other local sites they own. So for example, I might be on a local Dallas news site and an article that originally came from a local Atlanta site shows up for me to read. Because of this, they actually track a specific content ID and content owner, and these are both pulled from the CMS, the content management system, for each piece of the content across all of their sites. And so what they're actually doing at the corporate level, they have a data visualization tool, and they're utilizing Google Analytics 360's API to actually pull out the content ID and content owner, along with those DFP metrics to see which pieces of content is driving the most revenue across all of their stations. So they can essentially say, we know this specific content originated on this Atlanta site, but it's actually been shown on 30 other sites, and here's the total amount of impressions, revenue that's coming from this specific piece of content across all of them. So the next section, potential use cases, is really light, but I still wanted to include it just for people that are actually looking through the slides or might have missed the presentation. There are a few use cases I've listed here. Of course, this is not the end-all be-all list here. Really the number one use case, and I've mentioned it multiple times here, that we've heard from clients is understanding the different types of content that's actually driving the most ad revenue. That's really the second feature of that integration. Remember, we mentioned the first one was sharing audiences from GA into DFP, and then the second one, the second feature is actually that sending that DFP data into GA 360 reports. And so that's the huge benefit for using Google Analytics 360 and DFP is that integration, that sharing of DFP data into Google Analytics 360. So now we'll get to the good stuff. I'm going to show you some standard examples and also some custom examples, so some custom reports that are very similar to what some of our current clients are actually using. So I think you should immediately see the value in these reports, but I'll definitely walk you through these reports and kind of how they're configured. So first up are the standard reports that we've talked about. These are the reports that are generated automatically once the GA360 and DFP integration has been completed. So for example, here we have, skip forward. For example, here we have, this is the publisher overview. This is one of the standard reports. Essentially at a high level, it's showing you, your high level DFP metrics, things like the number of impressions you're having, coverage, impressions per session, publisher clicks, revenue per 1,000 sessions, etc. So all this is just at a high level, all across your site. The next one's going to show you the pages. So obviously I've blanked these out a little bit just so we can keep the anonymity for our client, but this is another standard report showing you the exact same metrics but by page. So now we can look at the home page versus a specific story versus a specific section page, etc. So this is breaking it down by just the actual page URL. And then you actually have the referrals, so where people are coming from. So this is the actual source of traffic that's driving people to the site. And so Google Analytics is able to essentially say, okay, we know this person's coming from a Google organic search, or it's coming from a display ad, or they're coming from a link on another site. It'll actually show you here that specific source and then metrics associated with those sources as well. So valuable to kind of understand which traffic sources are driving the most revenue for your business. The custom reports are the next section here. So with the custom tracking options that we mentioned before, you have things like custom dimensions and metrics you can use and content groups. So on the top left here, I guess bottom left screenshot, we have some examples of custom dimensions that we've used before with some publisher clients. So we have things like the actual date an article was published, the day it was published, month, year, the type of content it is, whether it's a video, slideshow, article, link, etc. Things like category, content owner, content provider, content ID. And then on the right here, we have actual content groupings that are set up, and some of them are pretty much the exact same as the custom dimension, but used just to make the reporting a little bit easier. But we have things like content classification, type, owner ID. All those things are being tracked with content groupings. So within these reports, then we can use those. So for example, this one's for content classification. And so this is for how a local site would essentially classify their different types of content. And so, we've talked about differences in how companies think of their content instead of sections. This company really thinks of it as types of kind of classifications for their content. But you can see here, we're using all the same metrics as a custom report, but we're using all the same metrics as the standard reports. But essentially the dimension we're using is that specific content classification content grouping. So you can go down through there and see, which specific content classifications have the most impressions, have the highest click-through rate, are generating the most revenue per 1,000 sessions, and so on. The next one is content type. So this is another one, and they use abbreviations, so I made it a little bit easier to understand here. But essentially, this is the types of content that could appear on the site. So things like a story versus a category page versus video, or a link. So this is obviously valuable in understanding which types of content on your site are going to generate the most revenue for you. And then publisher content ID is another one, and this is kind of the example we spoke about. They actually have an ID that's generated by the CMS for each piece of content. So with this specific publisher, it's possible that content shows up across multiple websites. So with their data visualization tool and the GA API, they're actually able to pull that information out by that content ID and then look at the DFP metrics associated with that. So across all of their websites, how each piece of content performs. So this next section is on how to get started with the integration. So we're almost done here. So there are a few main areas you need to confirm before you actually get started with this integration. So first, you have to be a Google Analytics 360 customer, and the property or properties that you want to link must be GA360 properties, so need to be upgraded. So that's the first big obvious thing there. Second is the majority of your DFP tags have to be Google Publisher tags. So a lot of other publishers that aren't on the newest version are still using legacy Dart tags for DFP. And so if you're using that, you actually have to migrate to the GPT tag first, because it's the Dart tag is not able to communicate with that GA360 tag. And therefore, you're not able to match up IDs with the different types of actions between DFP and then GA. And then the last thing is that a user must be an administrator on both the GA360 property and the DFP account. So this really should be a pretty simple step for most companies. You'll simply need to add somebody to either that GA360 or DFP account as an admin, because we're kind of assuming that they already have access to the other tool, right? So if someone's in GA, they probably don't have access to DFP. You'll have to give them access to that DFP. If they're in DFP, they probably don't have GA access. If they do, great. If not, then you'll have to add them to that. For the most part, you probably won't have somebody that doesn't have access to either. So those are the three things that you need to go through first before you think about the integration. Next, you'll need to work with Google. So if you've purchased GA360 directly through them, you'll have to work with Google. Or if you've purchased GA360 through an authorized reseller like InfoTrust, you'll need to work with them to complete that integration. There's a lot of things that actually go through the process that you'll need to have somebody do that for you. You're not going to be able to deal directly with some of these forms that need filled out. So really the first step here to getting started is updating your data architecture to collect any of those custom data points that you need for DFP and GA360 reporting. So we went over some of those custom reports that we created, essentially that were covering things like content classification, content type, content ID, all these things. If it's valuable to your company and that's how you think of your content, you need to make sure we're first collecting that in Google Analytics 360. If not, you're not going to be able to select those things as a dimension in the reporting, and so you're going to be stuck with the standard reports, which are still valuable, but not necessarily as valuable as they would be if you're using those custom data points. Then from there, you have to have Google or your authorized reseller essentially fill out a form to get the DFP integration process started. So there's information that they'll need from you in terms of your publisher ID, the person that has access to both DFP and GA. So all that information will be put into a form and then submitted to Google. So once Google essentially goes through those forms, they send out some emails to get verification that you want to complete this. So whoever owns DFP within your organizations actually has to respond to these emails and say, yes, we give permission. And so once that's completed, then you can go into Google Analytics 360's admin settings to ensure everything's integrated properly and set up properly. And then from there, it's creating and enhancing those DFP reports in GA360. So once Google's gone through the process, set everything up, it's really pretty smooth sailing after that in terms of if you're already tracking the things you need, those custom data points, you're able to essentially start plugging and playing those reports and creating custom reports to really help out. So last section here is Q&A. Before we do that, I wanted to quickly cover an upcoming webinar we have on September 28th at noon Eastern. Lucas Long, who's our product manager for taginspector.com, which is actually an InfoTrust product, will be doing a webinar on tag management. It's called Chaos to Calm, Tag Management Overview. If you're new to the concept of tag management or you want to learn more about it, I definitely encourage you to sign up. You could either take the URL off of this slide here and then add that to the browser, or you can actually just wait for the slides and then click on the link. But otherwise, if you guys aren't doing tag management, would highly suggest you start thinking about tag management for your site. It's very valuable. Also, here are the additional resources I put together. So I spoke a little bit about the Google Publisher tag. And again, that's one of the prerequisites before you can actually start with the integration. So there's a link there for some more information. I added the case study that Google just recently came out with on the integration that is with AccuWeather. I also spoke about some additional custom tracking features like custom dimensions and content grouping, so I added some information there. And if you have any additional questions that you don't want to ask during the webinar, you can either email me directly or you can click on that contact link at the bottom of this page when you get the slides and reach out to us that way. So let's go ahead and hop over and see what questions we have. Yep. So Steven said you cannot be any more Ohioan unless you mention Skyline Chili. That's very true. Skyline Chili, for those of you who don't know, it's a Cincinnati chili. You either hate it or you love it. I've kind of come to learn, but yeah, agree there. Let's see. Steven, another question on DFP audiences. Can you pass in demographic data like gender, age? That, off the top of my head, I'm not sure about. I know you used to not be able to do it. I think they might have allowed that recently, but I would have to double check on that for you. And then the other question here, does this integration work with DFP Premium only or with small business as well? To my knowledge, it's going to be with DFP Premium only. For most small businesses, they're not going to be paying for the Google Analytics 360 product anyway, so it wouldn't be an option. Let's see. Oh, Steven said it actually works for small business. So as long as you have Google Analytics 360, it's going to work for the DFP for small business as well. So thanks for correcting me there, Steven. Any other questions? We got about 13, 14 minutes. I'll wait for other questions to come in if you do. Let's see, one more question. Can you break down publisher revenue by campaign and keyword? That is a good question. Yes, you can. It essentially is, those are any of the dimensions that are available in Google Analytics through the integration with DFP. I would assume you're talking about DFP campaign and keyword. I'm not sure about keyword. I know campaign you are going to be able to do. I'd have to double check on that as well. That's not something that we've had clients worry about yet. Oh yeah, if they're collecting it in the UTM parameters, then yeah, you definitely be able to break it down by that. Those are essentially going to be there regardless of the integration. So those are going to be dimensions there by standard. Yep. Stephen, if you just want to email me, I can answer any of your questions. It's agibson@infotrustllc.com. Be happy to talk to you there. But essentially what a reseller does, it's for anybody that is wanting to purchase the premium version of Google Analytics. Essentially, if you purchase it directly through Google, they will set you up with the product, and then there's no level of support moving forward. There's no ongoing work. They essentially, I wouldn't say, what's the word I'm looking for here? I don't even know what the word I'm looking for is, but essentially they also have a list of people that are companies that are certified partners and then certified resellers that meet a certain level of criteria. So there's, you have to have so many customers, you have to have be, large enough size, whatever, where they certify you to resell the product for them. And then what happens is you are a ongoing, essentially, customer with that specific reseller or GACP. So the things that we would help with that Google wouldn't help with are things like implementations, ongoing support, ongoing training. So really the support and the trainings are the two big aspects of it. Let's say there's issues that are happening with your Google Analytics that you can't figure out. If you buy it through Google, they're essentially going to say, yeah, here's a list of the partners that can help you. Or if you're already working with a partner, then you're kind of, there's an SLA attached to that. So you have a certain service level agreement from that GACP or from that reseller to where they really are in charge of supporting the tool for you, helping you with updating tracking, anything really related to Google Analytics 360 or Google Tag Manager 360, which is also covered in the SLA. So happy to break that down for you a little bit more over email. That looks like all the questions we had. So thanks so much for joining today. I'm going to stick on here for a couple more minutes to see if anybody else has any questions. But if you have any questions you don't want me to go over right now, feel free to email me at agibson@infotrustllc.com. So thanks for your time today. Really hope you learned something valuable. Hope to see you at the next webinar with Lucas, and I hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday.